I was 19 the day my father tried to sell me. The air in Red Creek carried that late autumn bite, the kind that slipped under your collar and stayed there no matter how close you stood to a fire. The streets were wet from a thin morning rain, and the mud clung to boots like it had a will of its own. I remember watching it gather thick along the edges of the merchant's polished shoes, thinking it was the only honest thing in that room. My father didn't notice. He leaned across the counter, one hand spread flat as if he could steady himself through it. His breath carried whiskey, sharp and sour, and his voice had that loose edge I knew too well. "She's strong," he said, jerking his thumb toward me like I wasn't standing 3 steps behind him. "Works harder than most boys I've hired. Worth more than I owe, truth be told." I kept my hands folded tight in front of me so they wouldn't shake. I had learned that much. Stillness made things easier, or at least quieter. The merchant, Mr. Halverson, smiled without warmth. His eyes moved over me slowly, the way a man studies livestock before naming a price. "Debt's a debt," he said, "and I'm a fair man." Fair. The word settled heavy in my chest. My father laughed too quickly. "You won't find better, I swear it." I lowered my gaze to the counter. There was a crack in the wood running straight through the grain, darkened with years of use. I followed it with my eyes, tracing it end to end, as if I could step into it and disappear. "Turn around," Halverson said. I didn't move. "Mabel," my father snapped, sharper now. I turned then, but not for him, for myself, because I would not be dragged or spun like something broken. Halverson nodded once, slow. "Yes," he said, "this will settle it clean." That was the moment it became real. Not a threat, not one of his drunken boasts, a transaction. My father reached for the paper, and then the door opened. It wasn't loud, just the scrape of warped wood and a brief gust of cold air. But it cut through the room like a blade. Conversation stopped without anyone meaning it to. I saw him first in the reflection of the glass case, a shape more than a man at first, broad shoulders, still as stone, coat worn thin at the seams. "Stores close for business like this," Halverson said, irritation rising before he even turned. "Come back. I heard there was a debt being settled." The voice was low, not harsh, just steady in a way that didn't ask to be heard. It simply was. Halverson turned, and something in his expression shifted. Ethan Brooks. I knew the name before I ever saw his face. Everyone in Red Creek did. They said he lived alone deep in the mountains, where the trees grew so thick the light came down in narrow strips like something rationed. Said he spoke little. Said he had scars from something no one asked about twice. Said he was dangerous in the quiet way, like a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be feared. My father straightened, unease flickering across his face. "This ain't your concern, Brooks." Ethan didn't look at him. His eyes found me. Not the way Halverson's had. Not weighing, not taking, just resting there, steady. It unsettled me more than anything else in that room. "What's owed?" he asked. Halverson adjusted his vest. "That depends who's asking." "I am." A pause. Then Halverson named the sum. It was more than we had, more than we had ever had. Ethan didn't react. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and reached into his coat. A worn leather pouch came down onto the counter with a dull, certain weight. Coins. Real ones. "Paid," he said. My father blinked hard. "Now hold on," Ethan cut him off without raising his voice. "You said she was the payment." The room went still. Halverson's eyes flicked between them, calculating, always calculating. "And what exactly are you proposing?" Ethan's gaze shifted back to me. "If she's to be taken," he said, "it'll be lawful." My stomach turned cold. "A marriage," Halverson said. Ethan nodded once. My father let out a short laugh, but there was something thin in it now. You? Married? He shook his head. Boy, you don't even. Another coin hit the counter. For the preacher, Ethan said. Silence stretched long enough to feel. Halverson shrugged first. Law's law. My father hesitated, not for me, but for the count of what he was gaining. Then he nodded. Fine. Take her. Take her. I didn't look at him again. Ethan turned toward the door, then paused just enough for me to understand. I could walk, or I could be handed over. I stepped forward. The cold outside hit sharper than before, clean and unforgiving. The town looked the same, smoke from chimneys, wagons creaking through mud, people passing without a glance. But I felt already removed, like something had been cut loose. We walked in silence toward the church. I stayed a step behind him, watching. He didn't reach for me, didn't look back, didn't hurry. That should have eased something in me. It didn't. Because I did not know the man I had just been given to, only that I was leaving Red Creek behind, and whatever waited ahead would be mine whether I wanted it or not. The church in Red Creek smelled of cold wood and old hymns. I had been inside it only a handful of times before, always sitting in the back, always quiet. That day I stood at the front, my hands still folded tight, though I no longer remembered deciding to hold them that way. The preacher looked between us, uneasy, not because of me, because of Ethan. You understand, he said slowly. Marriage is a covenant before God. Ethan nodded once. I do. The preacher turned to me. And you, Miss Carter? My throat felt dry. The room pressed in close, the narrow windows, the worn pews, the faint whisper of wind against the boards. I thought of my father's hand on the counter, of Halverson's eyes, of the paper that would have made me something less than a wife. Yes, I said. My voice sounded steady. It surprised me. The preacher studied me for a moment longer than comfort allowed. Then he opened his book. The words passed over me like distant weather. I heard them, but they did not settle. Promises, duty, union. They belonged to another life, one where a woman chose her path, or at least recognized it when she saw it. I kept my eyes on a knot in the wood floor between us. Ethan stood still across from me. He did not reach for my hands until the preacher told him to. His touch was careful, not soft, not warm, just measured, as if he were holding something that might break if he forgot himself. That unsettled me more than roughness would have. Do you take this woman? The preacher began. I do, Ethan said, no hesitation. No weight behind it either, just truth, plain and simple. The preacher turned to me again. For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I thought of the road ahead, of not having a say in it if I stayed silent now. I do, I said. It was done. No music, no gathering, no one waiting outside with smiles or well wishes. Just the scrape of the preacher closing his book and the hollow sound of something final settling into place. Ethan stepped back first, not away from me, but giving space. We should leave before dark, he said. That was all. No congratulations, no claim, just a plan. Outside, the sky had shifted toward evening. A dull gray pressed low over the town, and the air carried that promise of colder nights ahead. A horse waited at the hitching post, lean, patient, already saddled. Ethan moved to it without a word, checking the straps with practiced hands. I stood where I was for a moment, the church door still open behind me, the town stretching out ahead. No one had come to see me off. That, at least, made it easier. Can you ride? He asked. I nodded. He studied me for a second, then adjusted the saddle, tightening something near the stirrup. You'll take the horse, he said. I'll walk. That caught me off guard. "You don't have to. It's a long way," he said. "You'll need the strength more than I will." I didn't argue. I mounted carefully, my skirts gathering awkwardly beneath me. The leather creaked, and the horse shifted once before settling. Ethan took the reins, not to lead, but to steady the animal while I found my balance. Then he let go. We left Red Creek without ceremony. The road stretched narrow and uneven, cutting through fields already stripped for winter. The wind moved low across the ground, carrying the dry scent of earth and the faint rot of fallen leaves. I kept my eyes forward. I did not look back. Ethan walked beside the horse at first, his steps steady, unhurried. He did not try to speak. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was deliberate, as if he understood something I did not yet. Time passed in the rhythm of hooves and boots. The town faded. The road narrowed. The land began to rise. By the time the first line of trees closed in around us, the light had thinned to a dim, uncertain gray. Branches reached overhead, cutting the sky into narrow strips. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt it then, the distance, not just from Red Creek, but from everything I knew. "Far?" I asked finally. Ethan glanced up at me. "Before night," he said. That was all. We pressed on. The path turned rough, climbing higher into the mountains. Rocks shifted under the horse's hooves, and I gripped the saddle tighter than I meant to. Ethan noticed. "Lean forward on the steep parts," he said. "Helps the horse." I did as he said. It worked. That unsettled me too. Darkness came slow but certain. The last of the light bled out behind the trees, leaving the world dim and shadowed. And still we climbed. By the time the cabin came into view, I almost missed it. A shape in the trees, low, rough, built more for survival than comfort. Smoke curled thin from the chimney. Ethan stopped. "We're here," he said. I looked at it, at the place that was now mine, whether I understood it or not, and something inside me tightened, because whatever waited beyond that door would begin tonight. The cabin looked smaller the closer I got, not in size but in promise. The walls were rough-hewn logs, darkened with age and weather. The roof sagged just enough to show it had endured more seasons than it was ever meant to. A narrow stack of firewood leaned against one side, cut clean and stacked with care. Smoke rose thin from the chimney, carried sideways by the wind. Ethan stepped ahead of me and pushed the door open. "Watch the step," he said. I slid down from the horse, my legs stiff from the ride, and followed. The warmth hit me first, not strong, but real. Inside, the cabin held a single room, a small table near the fire, a shelf with a few tin plates and a cup. A bed set against the far wall covered in thick, worn blankets. Everything had its place, nothing extra, nothing wasted. It wasn't what I expected. I didn't know what I had expected. Ethan moved past me, setting a kettle near the fire, adjusting a log with the toe of his boot. He worked without hurry, each motion practiced, quiet. I stood near the door longer than I should have, unsure. "Sit," he said, not looking at me. "You'll feel the cold once you stop moving." I hesitated, then stepped inside fully, closing the door behind me. The wood creaked as it settled into place, sealing out the wind. I sat at the edge of the chair by the table. My hands were still folded. I hadn't realized. Ethan noticed. "Don't need to stand guard here," he said. I loosened them slowly, though the tension didn't leave. He ladled something from a pot hanging over the fire into a bowl. Steam rose up, carrying the smell of broth and something root-like, turnip maybe. Simple, warm. He set it on the table in front of me. "Eat." I looked at it, then at him. "You?" "I've had worse than waiting," he said. That wasn't an answer. Still, I picked up the spoon. The first taste surprised me. not rich, not seasoned much, but hot, solid, enough to settle something hollow inside me I hadn't paid attention to. I ate slowly at first, then faster. Ethan turned away while I did. He gave me that much. When I finished, I set the spoon down carefully, aware again of where I was, of what this place meant. The silence stretched. The fire cracked softly, shifting the shadows along the walls. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in a low, steady hush. I felt it then, the weight of night, of being alone here, with him. Ethan stood and crossed the room. He reached up to a peg and took down a spare blanket, shaking it out once before setting it near the bed. "You can take it," he said. My throat tightened. "And you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to the door, checked the latch, then dragged a small wooden chest across the floor, not blocking the door, but close enough to it to matter. He set his coat over it. "I'll be there," he said. It took me a second to understand. "You're not—" I stopped. He looked at me then, properly for the first time since we'd entered. There was no confusion in his expression. "No," he said. Just that. No explanation, no softness, no claim. Something inside me shifted, sharp and uncertain. "Why?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question hung between us. Ethan studied me for a moment, as if weighing how much to say. "Because you didn't come here by choice," he said finally. The words landed heavier than anything else that night. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling again. "And that changes?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something held back. "It should," he said. "Should, not will." That mattered. He stepped back, lowering himself to the floor beside the door. He leaned against the wall, one knee drawn up slightly, close enough to reach the latch if needed. Guarding it, not me, the door. I moved to the bed slowly, the boards creaking under my weight as I sat, then lay back. The blankets were rough but warm, holding the heat of the room. I stared at the ceiling, listened. The fire, the wind, his breathing, steady, distant, not approaching, not changing. Time passed. I didn't know how much. Long enough for the tightness in my chest to loosen by degrees I didn't trust. Long enough for the fear to shift shape. Not gone, just different. I turned slightly, just enough to see him. He hadn't moved, still by the door, still keeping distance, as if the line between us mattered to him as much as it did to me. I didn't understand it, not yet. But for the first time since leaving Red Creek, I slept. Morning came slow in the mountains. I woke to the sound of splitting wood. At first, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling above me, low, rough beams darkened with smoke, felt unfamiliar, pressing close. Then the smell of ash and pine settled in, and memory followed. Red Creek was gone. This was mine now. I sat up, the blanket slipping from my shoulders. The air had cooled during the night, and the last of the fire gave only a dull, fading warmth. For a moment I stayed still, listening. The steady rhythm came again. Wood striking steel. Ethan. I rose carefully, my joints stiff, and crossed the room. The spot by the door where he had slept was empty. The chest had been pushed back in place. His coat was gone. Nothing else had changed. That struck me more than anything. No sign he had come near the bed. No disturbance. No quiet crossing of a line while I slept. I stepped outside, the cold bit sharper than the day before, clean and waking. Frost clung to the edges of the clearing, thin and silver where the early light reached it. The trees stood still and tall, their shadows long across the ground. Ethan was a few yards from the cabin, splitting logs. Each swing of the axe was precise, not rushed, not wasted. The wood broke clean beneath it, falling into neat halves that he stacked without looking. He noticed me without turning. "There's water in the bucket," he said, "left to the door." I glanced back. A metal pail sat where he'd said, a thin skin of ice just beginning to form along the top. "You'll want to break it before it thickens," he added. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I crossed to the bucket and knelt, pressing my fingers through the surface. The ice cracked easily, sharp and brittle, and the cold bit into my skin hard enough to make me pull back. I tried again, slower. This time I pushed through. The water beneath was clear and colder still. By the time I stood, my fingers ached, but I said nothing. Behind me, the axe struck again. I washed quickly and stepped back inside. The cabin felt different in the morning light. Smaller, perhaps, or just clearer. There was work here, not the kind I had known in town. No orders shouted, no eyes watching to judge or take. Just what needed doing. I moved to the hearth and crouched, studying the coals the way I had seen others do. There was still heat in them, not enough, but close. I added a small piece of wood, waited. Nothing. I frowned, then tried again, arranging the pieces the way I remembered, space between them, not too tight. Still nothing. The door opened behind me. "Too much at once," Ethan said. I stiffened, then forced myself not to move away. He stepped past me, crouching by the fire without crowding me out. "Needs air," he added, shifting one piece slightly, then another. He didn't take over, just adjusted. I watched. A thin curl of smoke rose, then caught. A small flame flickered to life, uncertain at first, then steadier. "There," he said. He stood and stepped back again, leaving it to me. I fed the fire slowly after that, careful, watching how it took. When I looked up again, he had already gone back outside. The day settled into small, quiet work. He brought in wood. I found where things were kept. A sack of dried beans, a small bundle of herbs tied and hung near the rafters, a tin of salt, used sparingly. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was plentiful either. By midday, the sun barely reached the clearing. The cold held steady, creeping into the spaces between movement. I wrapped my shawl tighter and stepped outside again. Ethan was repairing something near the side of the cabin, a section of the wall where the chinking had worn thin. "You'll lose heat there," I said before thinking. He glanced at me, then nodded once. "I know." I hesitated. "I can help." He studied me for a moment, not doubting, just measuring. Then he handed me a small tool. "Pack it tight," he said, "or it cracks when it freezes." I knelt beside him. The work was harder than it looked. The mixture, mud, ash, and something fibrous, resisted at first, then gave under pressure. I pressed it into the gaps, smoothing it with my fingers until it held. We worked like that in silence, not the heavy kind from before. Something steadier. The wind picked up in the afternoon, pushing through the trees with a low, constant sound. It found the weak places in the cabin, just as he had said, but fewer now. When we finished, I sat back on my heels, brushing dirt from my hands. Ethan stood, looking over the wall. Then he gave a small, "Good," he said. It was a simple word, but it settled deeper than it should have. As evening came, the cold sharpened again. The sky dimmed early, the light slipping away behind the mountains before I was ready for it. Inside, the fire held stronger this time, because I had built it. Ethan set another pot near the flames, and the smell of something cooking slowly filled the room. I sat at the table, my hands no longer clenched, watching, listening, learning the shape of this place and the man in it. I still did not trust him, but something had changed, not in him, in me. Because for the first time I began to wonder if I had been wrong about what this life would be. The first real snow came 3 days later. It started quiet, just a thin dusting at dawn, settling along the edges of the clearing and clinging to the tops of the woodpile. I stood in the doorway watching it fall, the flakes small and dry, carried sideways more than down. By noon the ground was gone, white stretched in every direction, softening the hard lines of the land, filling the spaces between roots and stones until everything looked smoother than it truly was. "Don't trust it," Ethan said behind me. I glanced back. "Snow hides what'll break your ankle," he added, stepping past me into the cold. I followed. The air had changed. It carried weight now, pressing down through the trees, muting sound. Even the wind seemed quieter, trapped somewhere above the branches. Ethan moved through it with certainty, checking the edges of the clearing, the path we had taken in. His boots found solid ground without hesitation. Mine did not. I slipped once, catching myself on a low branch, my breath sharp in my throat. "Shorter steps," he said, not turning. "Keep your weight under you." I tried again. It helped. That unsettled me more than it should have. By afternoon, the snow had thickened. The path behind us disappeared entirely, swallowed by white and shadow. The world beyond the trees felt gone, cut off. I felt it settle in my chest, slow and heavy. "We won't be going down to town for a while," I said. Ethan shook his head. "Not unless it's needed." Needed, not wanted. That was the measure here. Inside, the cabin held its warmth better now. The chinking we had packed kept the worst of the cold out, though it still found its way in along the floor and around the door. I kept the fire going, careful, steady. It became a kind of anchor, the way the flame caught, the way the heat built slow and sure if I gave it time. I learned the sound of it when it burned right, the way the wood settled as it took. Ethan said little, but I noticed things. He left more kindling near the hearth now, smaller pieces, easier to manage. He set the heavier logs closer to where I worked, not stacked high where I'd have to reach. He never said it was for me. He didn't need to. The days took on a rhythm. Morning, break the ice in the water bucket, feed the fire, warm what little food we had. Midday, work while the light held, repair, gather, check what could be checked before the cold drove us back inside. Evening, quiet, always quiet. The snow kept falling, not constant, but enough. Each morning it lay thicker than the last, pressing against the cabin walls, soft at first, then heavier as it settled. Ethan cleared it from the roof with a long pole, knocking it loose before it could weigh too much. I watched the first time. Then I took the pole from him the next. "You'll slide," he said. "Then I'll learn where not to stand," I answered. He didn't argue, just stood close enough to catch the pole when my grip slipped. And it did, more than once. By the end, my arms ached and my hands burned from the cold, but the roof was clear. Ethan looked up at it, then at me, a small nod. "Good," he said again. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. The cold deepened. It crept into everything, the wood, the walls, the spaces between breaths. At night, the wind found new ways to press against the cabin, testing it, probing for weakness. One night, it came harder than before. The door rattled in its frame. The fire dipped low despite my efforts, the draft pulling heat faster than it could build. I knelt by the hearth, feeding it piece by piece, trying to keep it alive. "It won't hold like that," Ethan said. I looked up. "Then how?" He moved beside me, not taking over, just guiding again. "Bigger pieces, let it burn slower." "It'll go out." "It won't," he said. "Not if you give it time." I hesitated, then did as he said. The flames dipped lower at first. I felt panic rise. Then, slowly, they steadied, deepened. The heat changed, not sharp and quick, but lasting. I sat back, watching it, learning. Ethan stood. "You watch too hard," he said. I frowned. "If I don't, it dies." He shook his head slightly. "Fire wants to live. You just keep it from failing." I didn't answer, but I thought about it long after. That night, the wind howled through the trees like something alive, pushing hard against the walls. I lay awake, listening, the sound threading through the cabin in low, constant waves. Ethan was by the door again, always there, between me and whatever might come. I turned slightly, watching him in the dim firelight. The scars on his hands caught the glow, old, pale against the rough skin. "You've done this before," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. "Yes." "Alone?" A pause, then, "No." That was all, but it was enough. Because something in the way he said it, something held tight behind that single word, told me there was more there. Something he didn't speak of, something that had shaped the man who chose the floor by the door instead of the bed. I lay back again, staring at the ceiling. The wind pressed on, the fire held, and for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like something waiting.